Alright, so the community's been up in arms. It's been an absolute shit show. Because, and rightfully so, if you ask me, because latest chapter ends with a crazy cliffhanger, crazy reveal that Oden is still alive. Supposedly, something's going. Oden has appeared at the end of the chapter, which of course has a lot of people worried that Oden could still be alive, which would, in my opinion and many other people's opinions, harm the arc overall. Or, speculation that it's not actually Oden, somebody else disguised as Oden. There are several characters that could do this, several different ideas circulating in the community on what this could actually be, and most people seem to think that this isn't actually Oden. And I personally am big on that train of please don't let this be Oden. Please do not. So I want to, make this video trying to make sense of it, trying to look through some of the major theories I've seen and talk them through, see which ones I personally think are the most likely, which ones I think can go in the trash, right? So, there was a very, 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 very good post on the One Piece subreddit that I will link into the description. It's by, let me see who the guy who made it is, by DrKuro, who did a very, very, very good breakdown. He broke down everything that we actually have in canon, removing any meta-narrative discussion, trying to talk about 5-act structure and all this shit. Just looking at what we have seen in the story, what chapters, what we have seen, and trying to determine what's going on based on that. And I think he did a bang-up job. I think he knocked it out of the park. No conclusions were drawn because this twist is so open-ended that there's so many different ways that this could go that it's hard to have some conclusions. So I'm here to try and say what my conclusions are based on what we've seen, what I think the most likely thing is for this to be. And he made a very smart choice of not looking at any meta-narrative aspects. I'm going to look at meta-narrative aspects because I want to talk about it, and I mostly want to talk about like my thoughts on it and things like that. So the main theories that we got here, we have potential explanations for Oden's appearance. We have Oden survived the execution. We have Oden was sent 20 years into the future by Toki before he died, I guess. We have Kanjo's ink clone, which could be a friend or a foe. We have Onimaru. We have Katarina Devon. We got Bon Clay. We got Thomas Teapot. And we got Spirit Oden. These are, to me, the main ones that make the most sense. There have been other things thrown in, like, I've heard people say, like Hiyori has some sort of illusion devil fruit ability. I don't think there's any reason to actually believe that. We've never been shown that Hiyori has abilities like that. I would believe that if we hadn't had an answer yet to how she survived getting cut by DrKuro earlier in the arc. If we didn't get like an explanation for that, then I'd maybe think like, okay, maybe she does have some sort of illusion devil fruit ability of some sort, but I don't think that's actually the case. And coming right out of the gate here, I want to cut off the ones that I think definitely are not it. Are definitely not the case in my mind. And that's Katarina Devon and Bon Clay. So the Katarina Devon, the whole thing behind that is that for basically both of them, the only thing that's keeping either of those theories or speculation going in that regard is the fact that both of them have the ability to do this. There's no reason why Katarina Devon could potentially show up in Wano because she's on Blackbeard's crew. He seems to have some interest in it, but the likelihood of it to me is very, very low. Like Blackbeard sent just Katarina Devon here. Why would she be trying to dress up as Oden to try and fuck over the Scabbards? Why would she be doing that? Why does she know what Oden looks like? As we see, this is Oden with the beard as he had it 20 years ago. He had that little goatee, that little soul patch kind of thing going on. He did not have that in his bounty poster, which is the only image that Katarina Devon would be able to work with in terms of transforming into Oden. Really, the only thing that people are saying there is because people still think that Blackbeard might show up. Could be, but I doubt it'd be in this fashion. I doubt that he'd show up with Katarina Devon pretending to be Oden to then trick the Scabbards. Like, why does Katarina Devon or Blackbeard give a fuck about the Scabbards? They don't know who the Scabbards are. It just doesn't really line up to me, and it just seemed like a really, really weird place and weird way to introduce the Blackbeard Pirates into this. Like, I feel like if anything, there would be so many other ways you could introduce the Blackbeard Pirates into the fold here. Plus, like, what, she's been here the entire raid? Like, she's, I don't know. It seems, I'm writing off Katarina Devon. I don't think it makes any sense within the story itself for her to actually be here. I think the only thing that it has going for it is the fact that she has the ability to transform into other people. Bon Clay, pretty much the same thing. Why would Bon Clay be here? How did he get here? Why is he talking to the Scabbards and pretending to be Oden? He doesn't know them. He would have to have touched Oden in order to even be able to transform into him. So to me, and Oden died, literally right after the person who last had that fruit power got murked. Like, I can't see any way in which we could actually explain Bon Clay having Oden's likeness and being able to transform into Oden without some serious retcons in terms of, like, he was in Wano at the time and shit like that. Like, to me, as much as I love Bon Clay as I'd love to see Bon Clay again, there's no why. There would be no reason for such a thing. So Bon Clay and Katarina Devon are the two that I'm comfortable with going, no way. Cross them off the list. They're not. It's not them. Next, let's talk about Oden surviving the execution. So that's one of the concepts, that Oden just straight survived the execution. He got shot in the head, fell in the oil, boiled up, and then, like, woke up a couple days later, like a couple hours later, and was like, oh, geez, ouch, and, like, has been hiding in Wano the rest of the time. No, I can't, I don't, for one, that's ridiculous. Like, if Oda actually wrote in, like, oh yeah, no, he just survived it, he just survived the execution, I'd just be that. It would be like Pell, but significantly worse, because as far as I'm aware, there was other reasons for why Pell ended up surviving that. It wasn't like a narrative driven reason why Pell survived. That was like outside forces kind of thing. This would make no sense to just be like Oden survived that execution. It just doesn't make sense. We saw him get shot in the fucking head. Why? It would cause so much retconning, and it's like, if Oda planned on not killing off Oden in the first place, why did he go to such lengths to show him getting killed like that, have him smiling, he's submerging in oil, all this shit, and the amount of narrative juice we've gotten out of the fact that Oden is dead, that's been like the entire thing for the entire arc. I think if Oden was not dead, it would seriously harm the arc. It would really put a dampen on it for me. And even if he went in and he did some cool shit with his swords and all that, like, and showed up against Kaido, it's just too much for me to, like, suspend my disbelief, especially when he had such a great send-off. Like, it's like, come on, like, no way. And if he survived the execution, that means he's just been here for 20 years. What's he been doing? Why has he just been sitting around? Why does he look the same, if that's the case? No scars, no burns on his body, nothing. Like, he's fine. You also have the Oden was sent 20 years into the future by Toki theory, and that is much more believable. If it actually is Oden, this is what I would think it would go for, way more so than if it was just he survived. That after he got shot in the head and he fell into the oil, he got zapped into the future, 20 years into the future. Again, bad for the narrative, in my opinion. Bad for the narrative if Oden just got zapped into the future like that and just didn't die. It takes away the whole impact of that whole scene of him holding him up, of that whole conversation with Kaido, of Kaido shooting him in the head. It takes away so much of, like, what has been driving this entire arc and the revenge we want to see on characters like Kaido and Orochi. Like, it really just ruins it if it's like, oh, he got zapped into the future too. Like, what the fuck was the point of like for me it would be god awful if Oden is still alive in either of these scenarios. It would be bad, but the Toki zap in the future would at least be marginally better. But it's still like, what, she launched into the future after he took the bullet to the head. He still has no scar. He's got no burns or anything. He looks completely fine. He looks completely healthy. I think if this was the very same Oden that we last saw on screen, getting capped in the head by Kaido, he would have to have a scar. He would have to be, have evidence of what happened to him in the hot pot, right? So, yeah, I just don't. I can't see any reason why it would be. Now there is some evidence here and there, as DrKuro went over in his post there. There is definitely some evidence for the fact that it could be Oden getting sent 20 years into the future. There's some. Now, I would go out of my way and say if that is what Oda's going for, I'm definitely dead set against it, and it would really take Wano down a peg for me as an arc, and I'm sure it would for a lot of other people too. It's something that's like, for me, it's really, really hard to justify narratively bringing back a character. Like, it really makes that, like, the criticism that Oda gets levied a lot of, like, he can't let characters die. It would really just be like the epitome of that, It would be like the ultimate showing of Oda pussyfooting around death if he pussyfoots around it that hard, where a character whose death is integral to this arc, he goes back on his death, like, all of a sudden, like, 40 chapters later or whatever. No, I would hate that shit. Most people, I'm sure, would hate that shit. And I don't think that's where it's headed. I think it's much more likely that it's a fake Oden, just because of the amount of people we have that could be faking Oden. Next up, so those two, personally, scratch them off my list. I really do not want them to happen, but I can't rule out that they could happen. Specifically, the Toki sending him 20 years in the future. It could happen, but it requires a lot of jumping through hoops, mental gymnastics to make sense of, and it also irreparably damages the plot of Wano, in my opinion. Next up, Conjuro's Ink Clone. Conjuro's Ink Clone. This is where I'm leaning at this point. This is the one I'm leaning on the heaviest at this point. I was big heavy on the Onimaru train, because let's talk about Onimaru first, actually. So Onimaru, the fox that helped Kawamatsu collect the weapons. The main evidence here for him that I've seen is, first of all, that he's a kitsune who can transform. There's that smoke around Oden's ankles, and the swords that Oden has are not Enma and Ame no Habakiri, which we know. So clearly, whoever is disguising as Oda here, or as disguising as Oden here, knows that he couldn't have Enma and Ame no Habakiri, right? Or has physical swords to some degree, right? If it were, Spirit Oden of some sort, he would probably show up with, Enma and Ame no Habakiri, for example. So Onimaru or Gyukimaru had an entire stockpile of swords, and people have highlighted swords that were on his back that are very similar to the ones that we see in this chapter. These could just be generic, like, sword hilt designs too. That's my thing, is like, it's not surefire evidence that it's Onimaru just because he has these two swords that look similar to the 50 swords he had on his back in those chapters. But it's still something, and narratively it would make sense to me. If the silhouette we saw in that room was Hiyori, it would make a lot of sense that Hiyori came here with Onimaru, that Hiyori went to Ringo, and Kawamatsu even said she has someone to protect her. It's probably Onimaru. She was hanging out with Onimaru, and then the two of them decide to go to Onigashima to help out in the war effort, and Hiyori found Scabbard's injured. She's healing him up, and then Onimaru is transforming into Oden to probably give them some morale boost. And there's another thing. if Onimaru is here with Hiyori and he's transforming into Oden, that could be used as a tool against Kaido. We could see Onimaru going up in that Oden form and kind of psyching Kaido out by being like, it's Oden here. We've seen that Kaido literally has trauma regarding Oden, that literally it like triggers him and psychs him out and makes him go. So like, if Onimaru shows back up in the story in this way, disguises himself as Oden, and psychs Kaido out and leaves him open for some big attacks from the worst generation, shit like that, if he goes up to the rooftop, that could be great. That would be great. And for me, I think that would be a wonderful way of reusing a character like Onimaru, who has been a character that I've been thinking since his last time we saw him. Was that all we were going to see of Onimaru, or is Onimaru going to come back into the story at some point? And I think that would be a great way to bring Onimaru back into the story, is if he plays an integral role by taking on the appearance of Oden like that, and that actually then impacts the raid in some helpful way. I think that would be great. I think that would be a really good way to, make Onimaru relevant to the arc, other than where he was already relevant to the arc, which was fine as is. But then there's some problems with that. As a lot of people have pointed out, we don't know what the deal is with his powers. We have never actually seen a mythical creature with magical powers within the world of One Piece that is not, like, a devil fruit ability, right? I don't think, as far as I'm aware, we have never seen that. This would be the first time we've ever seen that, and, you can, for the most part, assume that Onimaru is a fox that ate some sort of fruit that allows him to transform into his human form. And he keeps those eyebrows. Those eyebrow shapes stay the same between his fox and his human form, his Yukimaru form. So I think that's decent evidence towards that it's not Onimaru, because we have no reason on believing that Onimaru can transform into anyone other than the person that he transformed into, that we've seen, that human form that we've seen. We have no reason to believe he can do anything more than that, and you would have to jump through some hoops. Oda would have to do some retconning or some justifying of why he didn't transform into Kawamatsu when he was defending the bridge. Why did he transform into a different guy and then just take his alias? Why didn't, there's so many different situations in which Onimaru could have transformed in this way, but didn't. I could get behind Onimaru knowing Oden, because he was the companion of a daimyo, which Oden was, of course, a daimyo for many years. So I could see that Onimaru has met Oden at some point and knows what he looks like and could transform into him. I could believe that. And I'm fine with if we find out that, yeah, Onimaru can just transform into anybody, that's fine by me. That's fine by me. If he can just transform into anything, that's cool. You would have to kind of explain why he decided to change into specifically that form, that Yukimaru form, that, it's not anyone in particular, and why he decided to keep, his swirls on and stuff. Why didn't he just transform into Kawamatsu? It'd be hard to explain. We actually don't know whether or not it's just a normal devil fruit that he has, or if he has these legendary abilities himself. And then you'd have that problem of, okay, so now we have actually met a mythical creature in One Piece. Kind of hard to explain to a certain extent. You'd have to kind of go out of your way to be like, okay, yeah, so this is actually a mythical creature that we've seen in canon like this. It'd be kind of wonky. It'd be a bit of a wonky thing. A lot of people would have a lot of problems with it because, it hasn't really been foreshadowed that well, but it's still a distinct possibility, and I think it's one of the better ones. To me, that is the number 2 best option we have right now. Conjuro's Ink Clone. Now, I think this is the best option. So to me, this makes the most sense. Let's imagine the scenario here. Conjuro is still alive. I'm assuming if Conjuro is still alive, Orochi is also still alive. Fukurokujo left the stage, went off, haven't seen him since. He could have met up with Conjuro and Orochi and come up with a plan to trap the Scabbards. They hear that the Scabbards have been defeated and sent down to the storeroom. So they're like, alright, let's figure this out. They go over there. Conjuro heads over, discovers that Hiyori is there taking care of them. He captures her, right? He kidnaps her and brings her over to Orochi and Fukurokujo, and she's there, tied up, right? Because she's not aware that Conjuro is a traitor, right? So then Conjuro either paints himself or paints a clone of Odin. He has the ability to do this. It completely makes sense that he'd be able to draw an Odin that, looks exactly like Odin, and even draw him with or without the thing, and know to, like, draw him with different swords, because the Scabbards would know that Odin would have no way of having Ame no Habakiri and Enma. So Kandro definitely has the know-how, and everything kind of checks out for Kandro being able to do this. But then the question is why? In my opinion, if anything, it would be to try and lure the Scabbards into a trap that is being set by Fukurokuju and Orochi. That makes the most sense to me, and it would really, really land well into the tragedy aspect of things. It would really land well into the tragedy aspect of things if we had, if you had, Odin show up, and I could see it going this way. Next chapter after that, something like that. We have Odin talking to the Scabbards and telling them that he is Odin, and coming up with some bullshit reason for why he survived the situation, that Toki said him 20 years in the future, he's here to help, blah, blah, blah. Come with me, let's go. And they start running off somewhere. And then, they get somewhere and they realize, like, oh, what the hell? Orochi? Fukurokuju, what's going on? And then, boom, Kandro reveals that it's not Odin, it's him, stabs him in the back, stabs Kinemon in the back, shit like that. That could be great for a tragedy. So I could see if it is Kandro's ink clone, and which I imagine it's not a situation in which Kandro was actually here helping them. It's a situation in which Kandro is trying to trick them, right? That's what I think would be happening. If it's Kandro's ink clone, I don't think he's, switched sides on them, is trying to boost their morale with appearing as Odin. I think he's literally trying to trick them. So that's, to me, that makes the most sense, and that has the most narrative juice to it as well. That Kandro could then it brings Kandro, Orochi, and Fukurokuju back into the story. It puts the Scabbards into a situation where there could be a tragedy happening, which plays into the whole end of Act 3 kind of thing. It would double down on how terrible Kandro is, as how terrible of a guy Kandro is. I just think that the Kandro thing, to me, makes the most sense at this point. That said, I think we would get led on for a chapter or two into believing that it is the real Odin, that Kandro will have some bullshit story, and that we wouldn't actually find out that it isn't Odin until a chapter or two later, which would make a lot of people really angry. So we could be looking at, in the next chapter, being told that it's Odin, that it is Odin for real, and then having the rug be pulled out from under us, and then it's actually Kandro the whole time. I think that's very possible. I think it's something that Oda would do. And if going into the next chapter, or whenever we come back to this situation again, if Oda doubles down on it actually being Odin, and it doesn't get immediately revealed that it isn't really Odin, then I will be leaning very heavily into the Kandro theory here. Because until we see something that definitely proves that it is 100% bona fide Odin, I am not buying it. Even if it takes 4 chapters for that to happen, and we're being told that it is Odin, I'm not buying it until we see Odin do something that Odin can actually do. And regardless, if it is actually Odin, if it, we go 4 or 5 chapters, and eventually I'm going to cling on to the fact that I think it's Kandro's ink clone at that point. And then if it becomes very evident that it's not, and it is actually Odin, that's when shit starts to go downhill for me. That's when shit really starts to go downhill for me in terms of my enjoyment of the arc. I think it would be really, really worth it, and it would be completely worth this cliffhanger. That Oda has given us, that feels kind of cheap to me, if it ended up being Kandro's ink clone, and if it leads to them getting stuck in a trap. That's why I think Kandro's ink clone and Onimaru are the 2 best options, because they are the only ones I can actually see leading into anything. If it was Katarina Devon, I don't know, Bon Clay, what? Odin surviving the execution, or Odin getting sent 20 years in the future, none of these really lead into anything. Like especially the Oden, the having just being alive. It just all it does is retcon the great flashback we already got and everything that happened there, and kind of invalidates a lot of what's happened in the arc so far. So I think that Conjuro's Inclone and Onimaru definitely make the most sense so far. Conjuro's Inclone edging it out a little bit just because everything that we see here is congruent with it being Conjuro's Inclone, whereas everything we're seeing here is not necessarily congruent with it being Onimaru. Here's another one here, Thomas Teapot. I'll talk about this briefly. I don't think it's fucking Thomas Teapot, okay? That's such a left wing. It could have been, like, it seems like a thing that Oda might do, the Tanuki-san chapter title. If we go into the next fucking chapter after a break and immediately Oden transforms and it's just Thomas Teapot or some shit, I'm gonna be actually fucking pissed, because then it's just a cheap cliffhanger. That's nothing more than a cheap cliffhanger. What could Thomas Teapot possibly bring to the narrative? It's not even a fucking character. It's a teapot with a Tanuki head. It does, like, that would be one of the worst. That would be only slightly better than if Oden was actually alive, because then it would mean that it's just a cheap cliffhanger. That's all it would mean. And so, to me, Thomas Teapot off the board. No, there's no reason for it. There's no actual reason for it to be Thomas Teapot. Why? And then Spirit Oden. So like the Scabbards are dying, going to the afterlife, and they're seeing like a spirit, representation of Oden. Yeah, okay, sure, that would feel kind of cheap. Like, it just feel kind of like, okay, you just, like, let us on with the cliffhanger, and then they're just dying. It could be a very emotional scene. It could be very good. And I would be willing to overlook it if it ended up being a very heartwarming, good scene where the Scabbards, pass away, and they're seeing, like, an Obi-Wan Kenobi ghost of Oden being like, come on, guys, let's go fight Onigashima, and then he's tricking them, and they're heading to the afterlife of some sort. There is the whole idea of, like, the Fire Festival is to, pay tribute to the dead, so that could be an aspect of it that we're playing into here, that, like, we are being able to see the afterlife in this kind of thing because of, like, things like the Fire Festival. I could see that. And that wouldn't be too awful. I just think it would play a lot more into the cheap cliffhanger angle, that, like, he's leaving us on 2 weeks with seeing Oden being alive, and it'd just be like, oh fuck, yeah, okay, whatever. And then it just turned out to be like that. I don't know. It could be good, and I'd be able to overlook it, but it would still, like, leave a sour taste in my mouth. Meanwhile, Conjuro's Inclone, if that actually goes somewhere and it leads to, Conjuro getting them into a trap, and it continues the Orochi and Fukuro Kujo and brings these characters back in the story and starts to wrap that sort of thing up, and leads to a situation in which Hiyori and some of the other Scabbards can get their revenge on Orochi and on Conjuro. I think that would be great, and that would completely negate, like, me feeling bad about the cliffhanger if it ended up actually leading into them getting betrayed by Conjuro again for a second time, and then this whole thing where they have a situation with Orochi, where then they have a final showdown with Orochi and shit like that. And Fukuro Kuju, we could see maybe a Raizo versus Fukuro Kuju. And then if Jack shows up, then you could have Neko and Inu go in their final clash with Jack. Meanwhile, like, Orochi's there, and you could have Hiyori ending up fighting Orochi, and Conjuro having a fight with some other people, maybe Kinemon and Kiku and shit like that, whatever. There are just several different ways that could go that would be very interesting, and similarly to Onimaru as well. So I think definitely Conjuro's Inclone, Onimaru are the two that have the biggest chance of happening, and I think Conjuro's Inclone is the one that I'm willing to go with. I think it's the most interesting. I think it's and I think it makes the most sense given what we actually have seen in this chapter. And to me, it makes the most sense that it would be Conjuro's Inclones rather than Onimaru. But that's basically everything I gotta say here. I think this video is okay. I think I went through basically just my thoughts on what I think this could actually be, because this has been a fucking crazy last couple days in the community, just with all this shit. And the amount of crazy theories we're getting out of it too, like, oh my god, Thomas Teapot, bro, Thomas Teapot, I swear to God, is gonna go down in history, man, for the rest of my life. If it's not Thomas Teapot and it's like totally something different, I'm gonna be talking about like anytime when the character shows up, it's gonna be, oh, it's Thomas Teapot. Like, it's just that's totally got the, the Kaido is a poneglyph. It's a Nell. It's Ivankov. It's got the same kind of energy as that shit. Or the Croco Mom. It's got that same kind of thing going on. So, yeah. It's also danger zone right now. We're in danger zone right now because we're in dangerous territory where it could actually be Oden, and Oden could actually be alive, and that would be trash. I would hate that. A lot of people would hate that. Most people would fucking hate that if it was actually Oden alive. And I think Oden knows that. So that's why I think it probably almost definitely is not. But we can't rule out the fact that Oda could slip up that bad. He does have an ability. He could do it. He could do it. And people are bringing up like the parallels to Sabo and stuff like that. That would never in a million years fucking cut it for me. If fucking, because Oden had the same bandage in the same place as Sabo. Therefore, he survived getting shot in the fucking head and put in the boiling oil pot. Like, fuck that. I would hate that. But what do y'all think? Do you think that Kanjuro, Onimaru, real Oden, fucking Spirit Oden, Thomas Teapot, fucking Katarina Devon, Bon Clay Ivankov, who is it? What is it? Is it a Nell? What's going on? Bon fête à toi. Does that mean happy birthday? I don't know what that means. It's some French shit, and I don't care about French. Salute. I'm gonna link that Reddit breakdown into the description here. I suggest everybody check it out because it's way better than what I'm saying here. And it's a great breakdown. It basically goes through everything that you could possibly need to go through to try and figure this out. And because of that breakdown is really what made me come to the conclusions that I have come to, with it most likely being Kanjuro. So hopefully next week's, or the chapter coming up, next week's chapter, I guess, not this week's chapter. Hopefully next week's chapter will let us know, and Oda won't blue ball us and keep us guessing for like 3 or 4 weeks, which he more than likely will. But we'll see, and I'm looking forward to it, or I'm really dreading it. It could go either way. So salute the flag, rock and roll. Oden is dead forever, hopefully.